I think we started at 5 million and went to something close to 50. I also realized that, this company has tremendous engineering prowess. AudioQuest also was just a fabulous experience. Something like 6 or 7 of the top decks on Consumer Reports were made by Nakamichi. I said, I was just appointed president of Rolls-Royce and Bentley. At Zero was bigger than life. And I got to know the folks at Bang Olufsen quite well. Worked with Ted Nakamichi on product planning, product definition. Unfortunately, Nakamichi had come across hard times. The finest people I've ever met, and fell on my knees and had a great big massive heart attack, introducing the thing called compact disc. And we all went, holy cow, great. You can go home now. And I went there and it's like, oh my God.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Well, as you saw, that wasn't my typical intro, but those were some clips that are in this video. And that is Dean Miller. Now, Dean Miller, you may not know the name, but you certainly know some of the brands that Dean led during his time within audio. So Dean was the head of Nakamichi, Bang Olufsen, AudioQuest, Lenbrook Group, and he even had a little bit of time in there with Bentley Rolls-Royce. So Dean has seen it all and has seen brands go from the bottom to the very top of their categories. And he has some great stories to tell. So I'm going to leave it there and let Dean tell the story, and I'll catch up with you at the end.
So as you mentioned, I had worked with and actually have Walt Stagner to thank for putting me on the path of my career, and was going to school at U of I in Champaign, working at a local hi-fi shop, and that's where Walt Stagner and Phil Ward came from originally. And so I was hired. Walt went to Nakamichi, joined as the first American in maybe 1978 or 9, and then I joined soon after with Phil Ward and Lee Adams as the sales team, and headed out.
So you were all kind of out of Chicago at that time frame?
Phil Ward and I were from Chicago, and the West Coast fellow, Lee Adams, was, he wasn't from California. So he was a transplant. I forgot his original hometown. But I started as the Eastern Regional Manager, and Nakamichi had a little office out on Long Island in Carl Place, and just jumped in and the pool and the deep end and totally loved it. And shortly thereafter, Walt had left the company, and Phil Ward had moved on, I think, to Yamaha. And so Lee Adams and I were quickly rising up the ranks, and before I knew it, I think I was sales manager. And I also realized that, this company has tremendous engineering prowess and lots of engineers, and it didn't seem like they had a lot of business people. So I took off, obviously, in that direction, and was hired also by the parent in 1986 as director of planning for the company globally. So I would go to Japan for 1 week a month and did that for 4 years, and would work with Ted Nakamichi on product planning, product definition, and also physically write out the business plans for our 4 key sales areas around the world, and just enjoyed it immensely. And doing so, you go to all the trade shows and you're involved in the industry and get to know lots of people in the industry, dealers and wholesalers and reps and vendors and what have you. And I got to know the folks at Bang Olufsen quite well, and had an invitation eventually from them And it was time for my wife and I to get out of Southern California at the time. We had just had our 2 young boys. And so I took up that opportunity at Bang Olufsen, and we moved to Chicago in 1990. And when I joined, I think I was in charge of sales or VP of sales. And they had a fellow there that had previously been the MD in Sweden. Yeah, it means president, general manager.
Okay.
And anyways, he was trying to market the company to fame and spent lots and lots of money, which the company didn't have. He unceremoniously was asked to leave, and the CEO from Denmark tossed me the keys and said, "Your turn." I said, "Okay." And during the first 3 years there, it was really a turnaround situation. The company was in a bit of deep kimchi, and fortunately that worked. And these guys were brilliant and masterful, and I learned so much during that turnaround period. And then after that, they had the grandiose idea of opening branded stores throughout the world. And they had great expectations, of course, for America. So I started along that path, and I think I opened maybe the first 20 or 24 B&O stores. And it was great fun. And these guys uh, were fantastic practitioners, and it was always learning something. And they were smart guys. And so I enjoyed that immensely. And then lo and behold, out of nowhere, in 1997 or so, I received a phone call from a headhunter in England to head up a car company. Um, but they don't want a car guy, they want a luxury guy, somebody from the luxury industry. And he goes, "But you have to know a lot about cars." And I said, "Well, I do. I've been a car guy, geek since childhood. And, I'm your guy." And he said, "Okay, great." So we're starting with about 13 people, I think he said. And I was flying everywhere around the world uh, during this 6 or 8 month period. That also made it a little bit dicey. And because I thought, well, if I don't get picked, I can go home and do my job at B&O, which I loved. And I thought, well, you don't get that opportunity very often, and chances are I'm not going to get the job. But anyways, long story long, I went over to Scotland to play on a golf junket as courtesy of a guest of SAS Airlines, because I was flying so much on SAS, and played the old course, and then the new course. I didn't know there was a new course. And at the time, I was addicted to golf too, audio. And so anyways, ran down, they picked me up in a big Bentley Mulliner on a rainy Sunday night in cold, dreary England. And I remember leaving, and I first called my wife and said, "Okay, we're moving back to New York," because she was from New York and her family's back there. So she was all giddy. And then I called my dad, because he's from Glasgow. And I said, "Dad, I birdied 18. And he's jumping up and down and yelling. And he goes, "Wow, that's great." And I said, "Yeah, yeah." And I said, "I was just appointed president of Rolls-Royce and Bentley." And he said, "I'm speechless." And I said, "So was I." I accepted the job and left. And so anyhow, that was really interesting and great fun. And I ended up joining Rolls and Bentley. And at the time, the company was one company, owned 50% by the British military manufacturer Vickers, and the other 50% by the British government. And so I think it was a week or 2 weeks after I joined, I was responsible for the company in the Americas, from Canada to South America. And the company headquarters was based in Crewe, just outside a little west of Manchester. And the CEO, Graham Morris, was just the world's greatest guy. And number two was not. And I reported to number two. He gave me a call about 2 weeks in and said, "Did you hear the news?" I said, "No, I haven't. What's the news?" And he said, "They put the company up for sale." I said, "Terrific." And so, anyways, this went on for a while, and I ended up working there for almost 2 years. You know, people asked me a lot about that, and there was, it was the best job in the world and the worst job in the world. And yeah, in any event, the company, Rolls-Royce went to BMW, and Bentley went to the Audi group. And they said, "You can go apply for your job in Detroit." I said, "Huh, what do you think
Wow.
the chances are of getting that?" I said, "What's behind door number two?" So I left, which was fine, and went back to CES and saw all my old buddies and saw my old good friend Ted Nakamichi. And he said, "Come on back and let's do it again." And I said, "Hip hip hooray." Ended up rejoining Nakamichi then for 3 more years. And so they're from New York, moved back to Los Angeles. And this was 1999. And unfortunately, Nakamichi had come across hard times in the 90s and was going down the path of optical disc devices, what have you. And so they ended up being sold to one of their suppliers. And then they were sold to a fellow named Christopher Ho, who is the nephew of Stanley Ho. And Stanley is, last time I looked, I think he's deceased now, but was like number 5 or 6 on the world's richest. And he had the exclusive gaming license in Macau. So he owned lots and lots of stuff. And his nephew, Christopher, bought distressed audio companies like Sansui and Akai. And he really didn't grasp luxury provider versus a mass marketer. And so it was very difficult, although we were, went from zero to light in a very fast, short time. But it became just, painful to work for this person. So fortunately, being in Los Angeles, there's a lot happening in the audio world. And I had a introduction by a friend at the trade association to Bill Lowe. And, the dominant player in the cable industry that then was Monster Cable. And there were a handful of companies that were behind him in the very, very high end of the market, like AudioQuest and Nordost. And I'm getting old and can't remember all the names anymore, but there were half a dozen or so. And Bill's company was in Irvine. And so I think it was the first time I was hired on the phone. And so I headed up his company as I was hired as president. And again, worked in Irvine, and I lived 55 miles north. So when I was not traveling, I did that commute for 10 years. AudioQuest also was just a fabulous experience. And the owner, Bill Lowe, is brilliant and intellectually brilliant. And again, not the most savvy of business people, but he was the pioneering vision of the product and all of that stuff. And we also had Joe Harley working for the company, and he was a pretty esteemed engineer and did a lot of high-end esoteric recordings. And now he's head of recording, head engineer at Blue Note. So, he's another amazing, smart fellow. And, I was very fortunate along the way to hire and develop great teams. And I think we started at 5 million and went to something close to 50.
Wow.
Yeah, in 4 or 5 years. So this was a good thing. And so it worked out great, and enjoyed working there. And I had kind of a contract with Bill, more or less, that for 10 years. And then I thought, okay, by then I'm going to be old. And I thought I would like to go off and do something different, and actually teach. So I had a couple opportunities to do that. But let's see, in 2010 and 11, we had just come off the 09 financial disaster. So that had been happening, and my number 2 son decided to stay a little longer in undergrad and what have you. So I was fortunate. I had received a couple of phone calls from the audio community, and one of them was from Toronto-based Lenbrook Corporation, and they own NAD and PSB speakers, Blue Sound streaming product. They had been our distributor for Bang Olufsen and Nakamichi and AudioQuest. So I've known the Simmons family for 30, 35 years at least, and they're the finest people I've ever met. Just great people. And so I was hired there to run the Americas, and first had a little office outside of Boston in Sharon by the football stadium. And then I was living in LA, so we moved it to Los Angeles, had an office out here, which worked out fine. And again, responsible for these iconic brands and great brands, and turned out to be probably a little more work than I thought it was going to be. But that happens, and enjoyed it immensely, and was, like everybody back then, workaholic, like you, I'm sure, and traveling way too much. 2 million miles on United, 1 million on American, and anyway, a lot of travel. And I was over in Europe at ISE, and the following week had to be at Hotel Del for a dealer convention or something. And so, of course, I went to the office on the weekend to catch up. Sunday afternoon at 4, I was schlepping some stuff down the stairs. I had a little 2-story professional office in Torrance, and schlepping this stuff that was too heavy for scrawny little me, and fell on my knees and had a great big, massive heart attack. March of 2017, and, kind of the beginning of the end. And, and Lenbrook with the owner, Gord Simmons, he couldn't have been any kinder. He goes, you'll get over it. Don't worry about it. But, truth be told, I couldn't do my job. I didn't have the energy. So let's figure out a way to wind it down, which we did. So I went fully retired at the beginning of 2020, right at the pandemic. But, during the days of the 1000, the 1000 Mark II, the 700, the 700 II, 550, the 500, the 350, the company had manufacturing capabilities in Fukushima, the nuclear reactor town. Also through the 70s, Nakamichi was still a really big OEM supplier. Something like 6 or 7 of the top decks and on Consumer Reports were made by Nakamichi. And so aside from Fukushima was really the first real assembly line. And kind of like Rolls-Royce and Bentley, when I was there, they didn't have an automated assembly line. The chassis were pushed down a hall on a trolley. And these cars, the coach builders built interiors and chassis, and wood shop would make dashboards. These were hand-built cars. More or less the early days of Nakamichi, those were almost hand-built machines. One of the very unique competitive advantages of the company was that they manufactured their own heads. This was done in a very northern town in Japan called Sendai, and it was an old school house. And I went there and it's like, oh my God, fascinating. And so, they were just kind of making the turn from hand-built, bespoke product to mass manufacturing. And late 70s, early 80s, Japan was the big player in manufacturing for like 80 to 83 at least, before it, migrated to Taiwan. So yeah, we had plants going in Fukushima, and turned around the Sendai factory, and they were manufacturing. And that's when around, was it 81 or 82, the company was founded in 1947 by Etsuro Nakamichi, the oldest brother in this family. Right. And his younger brother, second brother's Nero Nakamichi, that means two in Japanese. And the third brother was Osamu Nakamichi. And there was one younger sister. And she owns a sushi bar in Shinjuku, a very famous one. But so Etsuro was bigger than life, just charismatic, suave and cool. He, I didn't know if I liked it or not, but I was just seeing it, and I was an impressionable young 23-year-old or something, and he would wear an ascot and leather jacket, and he bought he had a how do you call it, Bière de Terre in Paris, and he bought an original Mini Cooper there, and he bought it was an 82 BMW 635 CSI, and both of them are gloss black and just beautiful. And Nero would come to CES, and it was, he had an aura to him, and what have you. And so it was not uncommon for him to get together with Jens Bang. And, I was pouring wine one night for him, and it was just great. And then Nero died, and I think he was 54 or something. Then his younger brother, Nero, took over. And Nero was like an highly, highly educated mechanical electrical engineer. He was the guy that really invented some spectacular technologies for their day, like auto-azimuth correction, the computing cassette decks, all sorts of things. Actually, they thought that he may have invented UDAR. And so anyways, Nero takes over, and he too is bigger than life and has an ego to match. And so a little more demanding, a little tougher to work for, but still a great, great guy. And so I remember in October of 83, and Mark Fiedler and a couple other guys, I forget their name, were introducing the thing called compact disc. And we all went, holy cow. And the writing was on the wall. So that's when I think the sales team, both the American, perhaps Japanese as well, and the European, became much more involved because they needed the marketing espionage, started becoming very involved by 83, 84. And so there was, either we have to diversify into other categories because we had only been making cassette decks. Writing was on the wall. So lo and behold, the company made this Herculean effort and investment, into receivers, CD players, separate electronics, microphones and accessories, what have you. And that was a spectacular time. And I remember when we first came out with the first receiver line, and, we all felt, well, what do we hang our hat on? What's the hook here? Because, we can talk about our own technology and the feedback loop and all that jazz. But so I don't know who struck it up, but maybe Ted developed a relationship with Nelson Pass of Threshold, since his stasis technology, and
Right.
that went into the receivers. And, it was like, oof. And it was really, a call to action. It really made them different. And I remember, Scott, one time, I was going to Japan a lot by then. And I had a call from Ted. He goes, we have to pick the LED for the faceplates. And I said, for what? And he said, everything, the receivers, the CD players. I said, well, pick green. And he goes, yeah, it's going to be green. And he goes, but can you come here? And I said, sure. So I flew to Japan, and they had created a briefcase, just bigger than a 19-inch laptop. And he opened the briefcase, and there were 6 LEDs of different shades of green. And Ted goes, which one do you like? And there was a clear standout. Definitely that one. He goes, okay, that's what we picked too. He goes, great. He goes, you can go home now. And we went to Japan for like a 1-hour meeting that time because they were just so busy.
Wow.
Yeah. And
So we now, everyone who has those models from that era and they have those green LEDs, they can thank you for picking that shade.
I endorsed what everybody had selected, but Japanese people are, very humble, and they wouldn't, oh, what's wrong with you? So that was one interesting thing. So I was kind of getting my own wings by then, so to speak, and becoming more confident and pitching in on the product development side when I felt I had something to contribute. And so at that time, I remember that I really, really, really loved this product made by Proton, Taiwanese company that made televisions. And they tweaked the bejeepers out of a CRT. And, it was a high performance, high end TV. And, the specialty dealers of the day, Sound Advice, and before that, Hi-Fi Buys in Florida, guys are selling Proton TVs. And it was really one of the first forays of specialty audio dealers getting into video. Talk about home theater and how do we meld the two and marry the two. Right. And anyways, Proton made an AM/FM clock radio. And it was, almost the size of a lunchbox. And it had, I think it had presets on there, and tactile. It was really nice to touch. And it was in kind of this light gray finish. And, they spent a couple bucks on the speaker, and it sounded quite good for a clock radio. And I loved it and lived with this thing for as soon as it came out, and kept looking at it. And then one day I had the idea, it needs to be stereo. And, I'm married. And I did all this research myself, asking guys, if you're at the foot of your bed looking at your bed, which side do you sleep on? And 85% of the guys sleep on the left side. My theory is because they're right-handed. Anyway, I digress. But so I started drawing this. I was a big fan of whiteboards. During my career, I had to have them everywhere, and then electronic whiteboards and what have you. And almost like being Italian, I had to think out loud. And so I started drawing it myself in the design. And I thought, well, the master would go on the left side, and the slave would go on the right, and the slave looked just like it, but it didn't have all the controls. And we bought the speaker from Foster, spent a lot of money on that, and anyways, developed an AM/FM clock radio, Nakamichi clock radio, and they were called the TM1 and TM2.
Okay.
And so I remember one day, nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs, and Mr. Nakamichi was in town, and our office was also in Torrance, and I showed him and the product, and by then I think we had a couple mock-ups built in Taiwan, at least the housing, and with the green LED. And I showed him, and he loved it. And I thought, oh my God. And he goes, and he looked at me and goes, so what are you going to call it? And I said, well, nobody's heard of Miller, Nakamichi. And he was thrilled. And so, yeah, and we launched that product. And at the same time, I don't know where I got the idea, but had an idea for kind of it was the forerunner to a mini system. So once again, on my whiteboard, sketched out the physical concept, and then the feature set. You lay all that out, and it was an AM/FM receiver, maybe 9 or 10 inches wide, an inch and a half tall, and below it was a combi cassette player and CD player, and then 2 speakers that made it this system like about that. I used to have it set up here somewhere, and worked on that for quite some time. And myself, and we had an engineer in Torrance, Chris Nakamura, who worked for the company forever, and worked on that and had it made once again in Taiwan. I forget the name of the company. Huge company, very well known. And anyways, showed that to Mr. Nakamichi. He gave it the seal of approval, and we launched that. And I think in the first year, this is when Sharper Image was in its heyday.
Right.
And Brookstone. And in the first year, we sold like almost $10 million of those 2 things. The boom, like for the time, a home run. And so we did that, and that was, great fun. And I skipped over out of timing. We did the clock radio and the mini system called AMS, Auxiliary Music System, 86 or 87 maybe. And before that, we're coming out with all these new products, and they had to be a hit, the receivers and CDs and separates, etc. And so I thought, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And I could just see in my head at the product introduction that me and Mr. Nakamichi are on stage going, and here is the new TA2. One night at our house, and we were living in Redondo Beach, and the marketing guy and his gal was over for dinner, and we're talking and start playing out old TV shows. And he was Japanese American, but kind of grew up here. And, The Man from U.N.C.L.E. and I Spy, and then, of course, Mission Impossible. I think my wife came up with that. I said, yeah, I like that, Mission Impossible. So long story short, I ended up somehow contacting Peter Graves. Remember the main, he was Jim Phelps, shock of white hair. I loved that show when I was a kid. You know, you had to watch that. And so ended up contacting him. And then I met this other industry fellow. He is my best friend, if you have such a thing as an adult. And, you know, he was one of the founders of TED, the founder of the Republic of Tea, and just a creative, super duper genius guy. And at the time I met him, you know, I was 30 and he was 25, and he had his own corporate presentation company. And back then it was slide projectors. I set up a program whereby if the dealer bought so much stuff throughout the year, we would take the dealer and his wife to Hawaii in March. It was March of '86. So anyways, I have 400 people coming to Hawaii. I rented the entire Sheraton Waikoloa in Kona. And, you know, they all filter. We had sent them the pre-launch kit, and they had sunglasses and beach towels and a cassette to play Mission Possible. And nobody was really getting it. And I thought, oh my God, come on. And they filed into the conference center, you know, like sheep at 10 o'clock on Thursday. And the lights went down, and I said, I want you to play that Lalo Schifrin song as loud as the system can play it. And it was the famous, you know, Mission Impossible song. And outside, my buddy that was running, the producer of the show, we hired a helicopter, and Peter Graves was in the helicopter. The music's playing. He lands in the circular parking lot of the hotel. A limo pulls up with Mr. Nakamichi, me, and the marketing guy. And, you know, we sneak in through the back door, through the kitchen. Peter Graves looks at me, and I give him the gummy ball and slaps it on the door. And he walks into the conference room up on stage. The music's playing, a huge screen with 26 slide projectors, and said, "Good morning, Mr. Phelps. Your job is to embrace all this stuff." And he was acting like a dealer. And we introduced the products and the program and the service and the training and yada, yada, yada. 20 minutes, 25 minutes. And, you know, nothing ever works in rehearsal. It came off flawlessly. And it was like, oh my God. And yeah, so, and at the end, you know, Mr. Nakamichi's up in the receiving line with Peter Graves, and the dealers all walk through like a wedding reception. You know, I thought, oh God, this is incredible. A couple months later, after that, yeah, this was March of '86. And a couple months after that, Mr. Nakamichi's in town, and we're working on the clock radio. And he's in my office, and I had a small meeting table. And he leans back in his chair, and he wasn't absolutely fluent in English, but okay, and a little broken. He leans back, reaches in his pocket, and pulls out his keys. And he's thanking me for, I don't know, the product introduction or whatever it was. And I kind of, well, you know, you're welcome. I love working here. This is a blast. And he reaches back and he goes, and I want you to have my car. And I'm like, you know, I was, again, speechless. It's like, are you kidding? So anyways, and it was the black BMW 635. Drove it home that night in the slow lane going about 20, and made the mistake of going out to clean the wheels at about midnight. And my wife was at the screen door. She said, "They already owned or sold." I was a car guy. It was great fun doing that and so many other things there. And yeah, that was that.
Well, there you go. All that from Dean Miller. And I want to take this opportunity right now to say thank you again to Dean for spending so much time with me. For you guys watching, there are more videos coming from my other interviews I did with Dean to cover different eras of Nakamichi and Bang Olufsen and some other companies. So if you don't want to miss those, be sure to hit subscribe. If you'd like to see a little more content, think about joining the membership website over at stereoniche.com. And I spend a little more time over there. It's where I am. If you want to reach me, I can be reached over there. And I also share some additional videos that I don't post to YouTube. So think about that. As always, thank you guys so much for tuning in. It's a lot of fun doing these, and I hope you guys enjoy it. We'll see you next time.